Now's as good a time as that.
Okay.
Well, I'm Brad Cook, and president of St. Louis Writers Guild, and thank you for joining us here tonight. This is the SLWG Author Series for August. We are here with Nicole Evelina. Nicole is St. Louis-born historical fiction writer. She is represented by Jen Karsbach of Forward Literary. She is currently writing an Arthurian legend trilogy that tells Guinevere's life story from her point of view. Nicole is a member of a book reviewer. Nicole is a member and a book reviewer for the Historical Novel Society. As an amateur historian who hopes to someday earn a PhD in British history, she has spent the last 14 years researching Arthurian legend, Celtic Britain, and various peoples, cultures, and religious practices that shaped the country after the withdrawal of Rome. She has traveled to England twice to research her trilogy and hopes to travel to Scotland as well. If you go, I'm hiding out in your suitcase.
I'll make room.
Nicole blogs about Celtic history, Arthurian literature, writing, and books at her website, NicoleEvelina.com, which can be found in a link just under this video. She can be found on Twitter daily at Nicole Evelina, as well as on many other forms of social media. When not writing, Nicole works in marketing and communications. She's an accredited business communicator. I am not, obviously. Through the International Association of Business Communicators, a distinction that tests writing and communication skills and is held by only 8,000 people worldwide. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Tonight, I can tell you we'll be talking a lot about research and her writing process and stuff like that. So if you've got any questions, feel free to type them out in the text chat. But I actually wanted to start off by asking you, since you do have this extensive blog, and for those of you who have not gone there, do check it out. It is quite the journey. You've outlined the extensive research that you've done there. Can you talk about how that process came about, creating the blog and the trip and stuff like that?
Sure. It really all started just with personal research, interest in the Celtic period, and if King Arthur and Guinevere had lived, when would they historically have lived? And it varies depending on which historian you listen to, but I've narrowed it down to around 480 AD for the early part of their lives, probably going through about 530 or so. It's a time period of great transition, so there were a lot of things to learn about. What were the Celtic cultures like before Rome came? What could they possibly have preserved? What did the Roman Empire contribute? How could they possibly have lived? How would they have felt about the empire having abandoned them, almost 100 years earlier? There was a time of great religious transition between the pagan religions and the coming of Christianity, so there would have been tension there. It was all things that interest me just in general, and I started reading, and the more research I had, the more I thought, I really need to share this. I don't just want to be doing it for me, because there's so much of it that doesn't end up in the books, and things that just aren't appropriate unless you have a book that's the size of the dictionary. That I figured it was a good way to connect with people who understood the time period and loved Arthurian legend, and I've learned things from them. So it's been a really wonderful experience for me, and it's made me more confident in my own expertise, if you will, as well. So.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah.
So in terms of that, you've obviously traveled there. So where did you travel in Britain?
Well, the first time I went, I was in college, and it was actually the end of a class. There was a 2-week tour that started out. We stayed in Grantham in Lincolnshire, and we were in the northern parts. We got to see the Lake District, which will be a major location in the second book of my trilogy. That's actually where I've chosen to set Camelot. Okay. Most people don't do a northern Arthur, but there is a possibility that he could have had a fort somewhere around Carlisle. So that's the area that I'm focusing on there. Then the second week we stayed in London and did southern England. But most recently, back in June, I was there for an Arthurian legend tour, and it was amazing. We started out in Glastonbury and stayed there for 3 days, and climbed up the tour, did the Abbey, the Chalice Well, and if anybody's familiar with Marion Zimmer Bradley's Myths of Avalon, which is a book near and dear to my heart, it's actually what started me on this journey. Okay. And changed my life in a million different ways. But the guy who led the tour, Jamie George, actually helped her research her book. So to have his knowledge, and I was fortunate enough to get to listen to Jeffrey Ashe speak as well. He's a noted Arthurian historian, and he gave us about a 2-hour lecture when we were at Glastonbury Abbey. So those were definitely highlights. for me to get to pick those brains like that. And then we also went down into Devon and Cornwall, got to see Tintagel, Arthur's legendary birthplace, which isn't going to figure into my books, but it was cool nonetheless. Then we went just into the moors and various areas, did a lot of holy wells and circles, stone circles. It was incredible. It was 10 days, and it was jam-packed, full of history.
Very cool. That does sound like an exciting trip.
Oh, it's a trip of a lifetime.
Sounds like it. Okay, so to that end, with Google Map and Google Earth getting better and cleaner all the time, so do you think you still have to go there as a writer? Are there things that you learned by standing in the same place that you wouldn't have found clicking on the screen?
Definitely. If you get the chance to do on-site research, I think that's the best. It's the most authentic way, because every location has a feeling or an energy to it that you can't get from looking at it online. I mean, as good as those maps are, I mean, I've used them for when I was plotting out the Battle of Mount Baden. I've chose to set it at Little Salisbury Hill, which is right outside of Bath. And I've been to Bath before, but when I was there, I had no idea that's where I was going to plot, so I didn't pay any attention. So I went and looked, and I mean, it's good for orienting yourself, but yet it can only do so much. Like when I was on Glastonbury tour, I stood there and I looked at all of the different hills, because there's a scene where the sun has to come up behind a hill, and I wanted to see if I had the right one, and it turned out that I didn't. So, I mean, that's something that unless you're there going, okay, I'm in my character's shoes, this is what she'd be seeing. Granted, I'm back 1,500 years, but you can imagine. It's an amazing experience that I would urge anybody who can do it or can sacrifice to make it happen. Definitely.
Okay.
Go in person.
I would agree with that. So to that end, is there other things besides the sun and stuff like that you took directly and put into your book from your trips?
Not as much for these books, but I actually got the plot for a future book while I was there.
Oh, okay.
When I was in Glastonbury Abbey, it was a combination of a local story that's told that most people probably haven't heard of it unless they stayed at the particular place that we stayed, and just being in the Abbey and the ruins of the Abbey and wanting to be able to experience what it would have been like in its heyday. So that'll be coming in the future.
Okay. Well, beyond traveling then, are there other research tips that you, tricks that you like to use? Places you like to go to research?
Actually, one of the things I wrote about it on my blog at one point that I never expected is Amazon is a really good research tool, because they list out so many different books that are available. If you want to get an idea of what other people have done, either in your genre or other resources that you might possibly use, I love it for that reason. And a lot of times you can get a hold of books that are either out of print there, or if they're out of your price range, go through an interlibrary loan. It amazes me the stuff that they can dig up and the different universities that it comes from. It's kind of interesting to see, kind of who's partnering with you in your research without even knowing it.
Okay.
But that's one of the more unusual ones. I mean, I prefer book research personally just because I trust it more than what's on the internet, because the internet can be wrong. If I find anything on the internet that I want to use, I always make sure I can back it up in at least one source, if not two.
Okay.
So
well, that's smart, very smart,
yeah.
Especially with the internet.
Yeah.
So are there other avenues in terms of research that you like for clothing or for, dress or slang or any of that? Do you go into that kind of level?
I do. There are books that are on clothing, but one of the things I found with the internet that's really neat is it's so easy to get a hold of experts in any subject and ask them questions, and most people are very, very nice, and especially if you say, hey, I'm writing a book, they want to know all about it. And especially if you promise to mention their name in the acknowledgments, they'll be really happy, to tell you what you need to know. So I've been lucky to talk with professors at Oxford and places that, I wouldn't normally have access to. So, yeah, I recommend if there's something you have a question for, Google it until you can find, somebody who knows the answer, and if it's not there already, ask them. They'll probably tell you.
Okay. Good advice. Very good advice. Okay, now to that end, this is, a lot of writers are probably going to watch this.
Right.
So I have a couple of questions for that. To start off, do you have a favorite literary character?
Moll Flanders.
Moll Flanders.
Yeah.
Okay.
She was a woman ahead of her time. She was a spitfire that didn't take anything from anybody. And reading that book is like a soap opera. I absolutely love it.
Okay. Excellent. Has it influenced your writing? Is that character slipping in anything?
I think subconsciously. I hadn't thought about it until right now, but honestly, the character of Isolde, I can see similarities.
Okay.
In the way I've characterized them.
Excellent.
Yeah.
That's very cool. So then, to go to your process, then, do you outline novels that you write, or do you just fly by the seat of your pants?
I definitely outline. It's funny that I don't usually end up sticking to the outline because the characters do what the characters want to do. You know, I can be in the middle of typing a scene, and there they go and do something I didn't expect, and I'm like, what are we doing, guys? Seriously. They're always in my head just saying, oh, just trust me, and it ends up working out. But I have to have an outline because otherwise I don't know where I'm going, and it's easy to get mired down in, you know, little tangents that your brain takes you on, and sometimes they're good, but unless you get back to that main point, you can get lost really easily.
This is true. So then, do you have any words or phrases that you repeat, that you wipe out when you're going through the editing?
My agent will love this. A pet peeve of hers is when people smirk.
Smirk.
And I don't necessarily always use that word, but she says, I have found more ways to make people smirk. And she points them out, and she's like, no, you got to change this. So, and of course, like everybody else, the word that over and over again. That, seemed, had.
Okay.
You know,
yes, all the classics.
Typical ones.
Classics. Excellent. So to that end, you know, you work with Jen Karsbach over at Ford. Are you enjoying your agent relationship?
I love Jen. She is everything I could ever have wanted.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. Quick shout out for Forward Literary there.
Definitely.
Yeah. Back to that. So then, do you have? In terms of when you write, do you sit down in one place, or you molded to a seat, or do you find a little, shade of tree and go for that?
It really varies. Most of my writing I do at home, but even there I can be in different rooms. It depends on where I'm comfortable on any given day, where the sun is. You know, sometimes I'm outside, sometimes I go to a coffee shop. I did National Novel Writing Month last year for the first time, which I highly recommend for anybody. I was very skeptical before I decided just to see what it was, and I loved it. But we went to a specific coffee shop out in St. Charles, the Crooked Tree, and I fell in love with that place. So I've done my really honed-in editing when I have to really just block out the world. That's where I go.
Okay.
So.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
So then you don't write, I guess, at a certain time, but just whenever the muse hits you?
Not really. I try to write every weekend if I can. Okay. That's most of the time when I'm free. Sometimes in the evenings I'll write, but I write for my day job as well. So the brain can only take so much.
You can only throw so many words out a day. This
is
true.
Yeah. So if I get a chance in the evening, I will. Okay. But I have little feline companions that spend time with me when I write, so it's good.
Yeah. That is excellent to have, I'm not going to lie. So then, one question we always ask is, what is the worst for you to deal with, your first line or your last line?
The first.
The first line, okay.
Yes, there's so much pressure that goes into that first line, and I found, at least when I start writing a book, usually where I start is not what ends up being the beginning of the book. It's almost like I have to write myself into it a little bit. And when I edit, then I end up finding where the true beginning of the book is. So I try to write a catchy beginning line when I start, but, just to get myself in the habit and make myself better at it. But that's not necessarily the first line that you're going to read.
This is a very true, very, very true statement. Not even going to lie there. So obviously some love of the Arthurian world and the Celtic world inspired you to write.
Yep.
Is there anything else that's inspired you to write that made you want to put pen to paper?
Really the main thing for me was reading The Mists of Avalon when I was in college. A friend of mine gave it to me for Christmas, and I had been dutifully avoiding it because somebody along the way had told me, if you love the character of Guinevere, don't read The Mists of Avalon. But then when somebody gave it to me, I'm like, all right, this book is so famous, I have to give it a chance, and I read it, and I loved it. Absolutely loved it. But I didn't like her portrayal of Guinevere, and after that I decided to read some other books, more modern books, that talked about her, and I read Park Godwin's Beloved Exile, which actually looks at what happened to Guinevere after Arthur died. And I realized, not very many people talk about that. Usually she dies of a broken heart or goes off to a convent, and that's it. And I just had a hard time believing that this queen, that's really how she ended her life, and it got me wondering, how did her life start? And that was, I can still tell you where I was. I was in a walkway at Fontbonne University, which is where I went to college, sitting there reading, and all of a sudden Guinevere came into my head and said, you're thinking right around the right way. She says, I'm going to tell you my life story. You have to write it down. That's how it started.
Very cool.
So.
Excellent. Well, hey, it's an exciting character to write about.
Oh, she's amazing.
As a personal love of Arthurian, I love one of her. So then, do you have a favorite way of interacting with, people, social media, stuff like that?
Oh, Twitter.
Twitter?
Yeah.
Big fan of Twitter?
I love Twitter.
Okay.
And the writing community on Twitter and readers, people are very, very loyal and very helpful. And I love the instant interaction, and it's a ton of fun.
Yes, Twitter can be a lot of fun. I will admit that. So to your end of world building, obviously, part of your world is obviously probably built. I'm sure you're taking a lot from legends.
Right.
Are you taking a lot from the legends we know, or are you taking from more obscure legends?
It's a little bit of both. I have to say that my view of Avalon was definitely influenced by the myths of Avalon. I also went to an all-girls high school, so having all the girls together, and you'll see a lot of Avalon in each one of the books, was highly influenced by my high school. You can take contemporary things into historical fiction. I can't say that there's one particular. I mean, everybody knows the Mallory story. He's probably the most famous. But I'm not tried and true to one particular type of legend. I pick and choose, what suits my plot.
Have you created other new things, new world building, expanding out from that?
I do have new characters, and I have chosen, as I mentioned, Isolde earlier, to weave in Tristan and Isolde, probably a little bit closer than what you're normally used to. There is a part of Guinevere's lineage, the Votadini tribe, in what was called the Goaden, up in what is now southern Scotland, is going to be very important. I mean, it's mentioned throughout the books, but especially in the third book. That's something that I don't think anybody's ever added to Arthurian legend before. And really, for me, it wasn't as much the world as it was the characters. That I wanted to show a Guinevere that was very strong and was able to rule right next to Arthur in her own right, not just because she was with him.
Excellent. Strong. I like a strong one. Not gonna lie, I like that. Okay, so then to go to that, when you are writing, and you're, obviously, what does bring you the most? Obviously, your setting and your characters are kind of there for you, but is it the plotting, the dialogue, that kind of stuff? What gives you the worst?
Oh, the worst?
Or the best?
The best for me is dialogue.
Okay.
When the characters get going, I mean, they just take over, and to listen to them banter back and forth with each other and insult each other, and I mean, especially Guinevere and Morgan do not like each other. They're mean. Isolde is funny. So, that's my favorite part. I don't know that anything in particular is the worst. I love describing things.
Okay.
I'm a descriptive writer. Hopefully not overly flowery. I try not to be.
That's good. Well, I agree with that. Nothing wrong with being descriptive. So then, to that end, your voice, your writer's voice, and what comes through. How did you find that? Just
a lot of trial and error. I think when you start writing, you probably write whoever in the voice of whoever influences you the most, imitation, and then the more you write, the more you find what differentiates you, and your voice just kind of develops. I can't say there was anything I did on purpose, but I mean, I can remember early drafts of this going, oh, this is too much like this person or too much like that person. But the more you work with it and the more you massage it and look at what do you really bring to the story, what is it that you're trying to do that's different, I think that's the closest I can get to any kind of technique for finding your voice.
Okay. Just
really look at what's unique.
That's good advice. So to kind of segue from that, you are a book reviewer and a member of the Historical Novel Society. Mm-hmm. What made you want to join that? Obviously, you have a love of history. I'm sure that sparked it.
I do. Yeah, it was a matter of finding other people. I mean, historical fiction, it's becoming more and more popular, but it's nothing like mystery or romance where pretty much everybody has read a book in that genre. Some people, I think, might be intimidated by historical fiction because of the historical element of it. They may feel like they don't understand it. And I wanted to meet with a group of people who that was their passion, that was their thing, so that we could relate to each other.
So have you enjoyed the books you've reviewed?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure. So to that end, if you, I guess, how did you get exactly started with the Historical Novel Society? joined up?
Yeah, I found them online, and I joined, and they have a quarterly magazine that comes out, and I read that faithfully, and I was like, I want to be in there someday. And then back in January, they put out a call for people to review ebooks and things online, because I was becoming more and more popular, and they're getting more and more submissions. And so I applied, and they have very specific guidelines for when you do a review, and the reviews that I had done on my blog were more effusive, and they were a lot longer because it's my blog and I can do what I want. But I took their guidelines and actually reviewed Nancy Biliou, I think is how her last name is pronounced, a book called The Chalice, and I used that as my kind of audition for them. They don't require it, but they do require a couple of samples, and I thought, why don't I give them one that's specifically written within their guidelines so they can see that I can do it.
Okay. Excellent. So I'm guessing you've enjoyed this?
Oh, yes.
Love of reading, then?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Okay. Voracious reader?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
most writers are. I just checked.
In my car right now, there are 2 audiobooks and 2 hard books, and I can't even tell you how many books are on my Kindle. So, yeah, there's too many books and not enough time, especially when you write them too.
Okay. Yes. We were just talking about that.
Yep.
So I'm going to actually quickly jump over. See, is there any questions that are coming from online? Mm-hmm. All right. Are there any questions from anyone here?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering how you went about getting your agent as a historical fiction writer.
I did a lot of research into who represents the genres and what agencies have had the most success. And my agent is actually a fairly new agent, but I found her in a roundabout way through Twitter. Her mentor, another agent at Forward, Pam, was doing a whole bunch of different contests and stuff like that, and she actually opened her list to different genres, and historical fiction was one. I had already actually had a request at that agency for a full manuscript. They declined, but I asked Pam, is it okay for me to go ahead and query you, because some agencies say a no from one is a no from all. Others, individual people are individual people, and she said, yeah, sure, send it in. And she felt like it was a better fit for Jen. And at that point, I didn't even know Jen existed. So it was immediate, an immediate spark between the two of us. And yeah, the night I actually got the offer, I lost my brain completely. So yeah, and we've had an amazing relationship. So definitely, everybody gets rejections, unfortunately, and they're terrible. But hold out for the right kind of agent, for the one that whatever you want, whatever your specifics are, because when you find that person who is as interested, if not more, in your story than you are, it's so incredibly validating that all the time you've spent and all the hard work that you put into it, it really has meant something. It hasn't been just some fruitless hobby that you have. I mean, it's really going to turn into something someday.
How long did you spend as a researcher just satisfying your own curiosity and growing before you began writing, and then how long did it take you to actually complete the project? I researched on and off, so it wouldn't be a solid period, but probably about 10 years before. And that was just learning more and more, because one thing leads you to another. Writing the book, from the first word that is written, it's been about 14 years, but there were years and years in there that I didn't touch it. I was going to graduate school, I had very busy jobs and things like that, but if I was to condense it all down, it probably took about 5 or 6 years.
I know the Historical Novel Society had, I think it's every other year they have a conference.
They do.
Did you go to that this year?
I did not. It was right after I got back from England, so there was no way I could swing more vacation.
Well, I was wondering, because I know that sometimes they have writers' tracks, and I was wondering how those went, but you wouldn't know.
Well, I actually, they have all of their workshops available online. If you go to the Historical Novel Society site, there's a link there. Okay. And I actually ordered 6 of them. I haven't gotten a chance to listen to them yet, but it seemed like all of them were in my wheelhouse this year.
Okay.
So. Yeah, but I'm hoping to go, not next year because that'll be in England, but the year after that. Yeah.
You seem, listening to you present, that maybe you're a perfectionist.
Oh yeah, a little bit.
And I am also, and I wonder how that's interfered, because I find that in my research I'm never done. I never know quite when to quit researching and start writing.
Yeah, I think at some point you just have to trust the information that you've got, and
as you go, if you think of something that you need to add, just mark it down and go back and do it later. Because, like you said, if you keep researching, you'll never write. And I mean, if there's something, I try not to, when I'm sitting down to write, I try not to research at the same time. That I just, put in X for a place name or a character name or whatever it is I'm looking for. Word for this and that if I can't think of the word. Because, again, if you stop, you may not get back into the flow. And as far as, when you stop researching, it's really the day that the book is actually finished. Yeah. I mean, there's probably a little bit that I'll go back and fact check, still, because it just, you always think of something, and you really want to get it right, and different sources contradict each other, so...
You find new information.
Exactly. Yes.
You talked earlier about having Guinevere be a stronger character, one who could hold her own against Arthur and whatnot. In your research, did you find anything from the peoples of that time period that women did have a strong role in society or not?
Definitely. Celtic women were very, very strong women. The Celtic laws were actually some of the most progressive in Europe for the time period. That women were allowed to hold land, they could be warriors. That was a little bit earlier in the Celtic period, but especially the northern tribes that are what's now southern Scotland, it would have still been tradition for women to be trained in battle. And it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility for there to be a battle queen who actually would lead along with her husband, which is how I have Guinevere portrayed. Women of all levels of society, were just so much better off. In the Greek and Roman laws, they were pretty much considered property, but they had laws in their own right. They could divorce. I mean, there were. I could probably go on about Celtic law for a few hours. Nobody other than me cares. But so, yeah, suffice it to say, they had a very high standing in society. So I'm lucky in that regard. That if I was placing Arthurian legend in the Middle Ages, which is when most of it was written, Guinevere, I mean, there are some things I could do to make her stronger, but she wouldn't be as strong just because the women of the time couldn't.
Cool. Any other questions?
I do.
Yeah.
Sure.
Feel free.
So you did all this research. How do you organize all that? Because I wrote a historical fiction, and my organization was horrible, and it was middle grade, so it didn't need quite as much as you would need for a trilogy. But I don't know. I'm just wondering, how do you do that?
Well, I mean, I have one notebook that I take all of my notes in, and I always, I mark at the beginning. I mean, it sounds really obvious, but the title and the author, so that if I'm just flipping through looking for a specific book, it becomes a little bit easier. And I try when I take my notes to categorize them, like if I'm reading about daily life, or if I'm reading about politics, or the clothing that a bishop would have worn at a given time period. Just give myself little clues within my notes. And I also did note cards as far as like plotting the book and details that I didn't want to forget exactly where they went. So I had a little recipe box full of note cards that were in numerical order and based on chapter, and of course the chapter numbers are all completely different now than they were at the time. But
were you a debater?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you do it all by hand, though. You don't
Yeah.
use any online tool or whatever.
No, I'm old-fashioned when it comes
Yeah.
to that.
Have you ever created a timeline for your book before you wrote it?
Yeah. I think I think you have to at least have a general timeline, if not specifics. Even if I just know the year and the season, or 2 years have passed between the scene and that scene. I actually have a whiteboard at home it's not attached to anything, so I can move it. I can lay it on the floor and move around with it. I mean, I do some outlining that way, especially when I need to re-outline in the middle of a book. It's really good because you can erase it and it doesn't matter, and you can draw lines from over here to over there, and that's really helped. But yeah, I always start out with a timeline.
More.
Sure.
Bring
it on.
I was writing them
Go
down
on.
while you were talking. So you have 3 books, and did the agent, is she going to represent all 3, or how did that process go when you were doing that?
When I wrote my query letter, you only query one book at a time, so I was really just querying the first book, but I mentioned that it was part of a trilogy and kind of gave in my first paragraph an overview of what the whole trilogy would would consist of. So, I'm writing a historical fantasy trilogy based on Guinevere, telling her story from way before she met Arthur, through her time with him and her time after him, in 3 books.
Oh, okay.
So.
Has your agent queried media? Have you heard anything like for movies and television or anything like that?
That's something I can't talk about.
That's your material sounds like it's ideal for that.
I hope so.
Well, that's good.
Well, and then I guess my other question related to that is, oh my gosh, it just went out of my head. When you queried your agent and you the three books, I can't remember it. If I think of it again, I'll.
Nope, there will be time after.
Oh, yeah.
So
Okay.
not a problem there.
I'll be here.
There's
All right.
something that you said, but now, I know, the historical fantasy. That's not a very common genre. Or,
Right.
there's like Regency romance, and so how did your agent see the book in the bookstore? Because you always hear that, or does that even matter anymore because of everything that's how publishing is changing?
I don't know how much it'll really matter. Historical fantasy is just a subgenre of historical fiction.
Okay.
In most bookstores it's shelved with general fiction. So I have a feeling they put me in that same general
Right.
group. The only reason I consider it fantasy is because I do have some elements of magic in there.
Oh.
They're not, the big lightning bolt from the sky, somebody's shooting fireballs out of their eyes. It's not that kind of thing. It's more in keeping with the druidic beliefs, elemental type stuff. They can control the weather. So.
You do a lot of studying with the druids?
Yes.
Very good people.
Cool.
Yes.
Very interesting people.
Yeah. And neo-pagan religions in general, just to familiarize myself.
Okay.
So how are you connecting with your readers? Are you finding that successful?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, people seem to be very hungry for Arthurian legend, and coming from a female perspective, there are other authors who have done it before me, but I don't think there's been a book out in probably about 10 years or so that has looked at it from the female perspective. So a lot of people say, oh my gosh, I can't wait to read that. So
where do you find them? Because it seems like most of the blogs that I know about are kind of aimed at other writers rather than at readers.
Yeah, a lot of times they find me.
Okay.
Some of the search terms that come up that people have found my blog, it just interests me. How in the world did you get here from there? But it's and a lot of it's being on social media too. Again, Twitter is my favorite one. I do have a Facebook page. I'm on Pinterest, and I've got boards just for who would be my fantasy, actors playing the characters, because when I write, I cast the characters in my head. And it's easier for me, honestly, if I can see an actor in the role, because I get those little nuances of gestures and inflections of voice that I wouldn't necessarily have if it was somebody that I had made up. But I wrote a book and a half without having a Guinevere. Wow. So, I searched and searched and searched, but I thought, I'm writing this through her eyes, so maybe it's okay that I don't know necessarily who would play her. So, but
who's gonna play her?
well, I actually there's 3 different actresses just based on her age progression. Jessica Findlay, who was Sybil on Downton Abbey, is the one who I imagined for younger. I cannot think of the actress's name. That it was kind of in the middle, and I just saw her on something. She was in the 9 Lives of Chloe King. If anybody saw that, it was on ABC Family. But she played one of the mothers, and then Maria Doyle Kennedy for Guinevere when she gets older.
Okay. So I would imagine that you're drawing a lot of interest in university English departments. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And I was an English major too, not surprisingly. So. Yeah, and actually one of the first people who beta read my first book was my English professor from Papua.
Cool.
So Ben Moore, and he was amazing, and it helped me too. He was the first guy who had read it, so to get a male perspective, at that point he was like, "You need to rough these characters up more." That was it was a rough time period. He's like, "Your battle scenes are good, but they're too clean," and I have remembered that ever since. So I have no fear of injuring my characters now.
All right. Well, I think we're going to end at least the online portion. If you guys have more questions, feel free to
I
ask
talk
them.
a lot. So.
But we're going to end the online portion there. The only thing I do want to mention is that if you would like to know more about Nicole, stop on by Writers in the Park. She's going to be talking all about how she picked up her agent and all the little tips she used and everything like that. Writers in the Park is Saturday, August 24th. It's the 4th annual Writers in the Park. And we'll be out at Kirkwood Park from 10 to 2 p.m. And she will be at 10 a.m., so be there early. All right. Thank you so much. Her blog, Nicole's blog, will be listed below this in a link, so do check it out. Check out her website. It's there as well, so you can learn all about her. Other than that, thank you so much for being here. We truly enjoyed it. And have a great night, everyone online.
And this novel with the blog.
Thank you.